My name is Chloe. I'm 27 years old, and for as long as I can remember, my mother treated me like a stray she was forced to tolerate. I kept telling myself that if I just stayed quiet, I would eventually belong. But the event that made it impossible to keep lying to myself came at Christmas dinner. Right as the ham was being carved, my mother looked around at our 12 guests, chuckled, and told everyone to hide their valuables because I was there. She always had thief genes from her father, she said. 12 people went completely silent. My uncle smirked into his wine glass. I was the scapegoat. I was the punchline. I was the target kept close enough to serve her ego but never close enough to count. I thought I was the problem. I was wrong. My mother thought this was just another night she could use me for a cheap laugh. She had no idea what was sitting inside my backpack. I unzipped it, pulled out a medical clinic report from 6 weeks ago, and dropped it dead center on her dinner plate. Once that hidden truth came out, my sister dropped her piece of pork right onto the tablecloth, and the family's entire reputation was about to be destroyed by the fact that the woman at the head of the table had zero biological ties to a single person in that room. Before I go on, take a moment to like and subscribe, but only if this story speaks to you. Drop your location and local time in the comments. Now, let me take you back. The hierarchy in our house wasn't built on love. It was built on a chart. My mother, Evelyn, treated genetics like a caste system, and she was the high priestess of good blood. To her, Mia was the gold standard, a perfect replica of Evelyn's own features, her porcelain skin, and her supposed intellectual pedigree. I was just the leftover parts. Whenever we were in public, Evelyn would tuck a strand of hair behind Mia's ear and tell whoever was listening that Mia was pure her. Then her eyes would slide to me, usually standing 2 paces behind them holding the bags. She'd sigh, a small, weary sound, and mention that I clearly took after my father's side. She made my father's side sound like a terminal illness. He had been a quiet man, a carpenter who died when I was 7, but in Evelyn's retelling, he was a chaotic mess of bad impulses and shifty traits that I had unfortunately inherited. The unfairness wasn't a one-time event, it was the atmosphere of the house. I remember the summer I turned 16. Mia wanted to go to a prestigious tennis camp. It was expensive, thousands of dollars we didn't really have, but Evelyn didn't hesitate. "It's in your DNA, Mia," she said, signing the check. "The women in my family have always been athletes. We have the stamina for it. It would be a crime to waste those genes." 2 weeks later, I asked for a second-hand sewing machine so I could fix my school uniforms. Evelyn didn't even look up from her magazine. She told me that I lacked the fine motor skills of her lineage and that I'd likely just break the machine or hurt myself. I ended up hand-stitching my skirts with a needle I bought at the drugstore. I sat on the floor of the laundry room, the only place I felt I wouldn't contaminate the living room aesthetic, and wondered why my hands were considered so clumsy when Mia's were considered divine. The chores followed the same genetic logic. Every holiday, the division of labor was a foregone conclusion. Because Mia was the delicate one, she was tasked with the artistic duties, arranging the flowers, setting the crystal, and picking out the music. I was the sturdy one. I was the one who climbed the ladder to hang the heavy garlands. I was the one who spent 6 hours on my hands and knees scrubbing the baseboards because Evelyn said my father's people were built for labor. On my 24th birthday, Evelyn handed Mia a velvet box. Inside was a heavy gold locket that had belonged to Evelyn's grandmother. "This stays in the bloodline," Evelyn whispered, clicking it shut around Mia's neck. Then she turned to me and handed me a plastic bucket filled with high-end cleaning supplies. "I bought the professional strength stuff for the kitchen tiles, Chloe. Since you have that natural energy, I figured you could get the grout white before the guests arrive for dinner tonight. It's better you stay busy anyway. I took the bucket. I didn't say thank you. I just went to the kitchen and started scrubbing. I had been in therapy for 3 years by then. My therapist kept trying to get me to see that my flaws were actually just Evelyn's projections, but it's hard to believe a stranger when your own mother tells you your very cells are a disappointment. I felt like a guest in my own life, a stray dog allowed to sleep in the mudroom as long as I didn't bark. The shift happened 6 weeks ago. I had been feeling dizzy, experiencing these strange heart palpitations that wouldn't go away. When I went to a local clinic, the doctor was concerned. He sat me down and looked over my intake form. "We need to look at your family history, Chloe," he said. "Specifically your maternal side. These things can be hereditary. Can you get me a detailed breakdown of any cardiac issues in your mother's lineage?" I told him I'd ask. I thought, for once, Evelyn would put the gene talk to good use. I thought maybe my health would be the one thing that mattered more than her ego. I went home that afternoon and found her in the sunroom, flipping through a catalog of expensive linens. I told her what the doctor said. I told her I was scared. She didn't put the catalog down. She didn't even look at me. "Oh, Chloe," she said, her voice dripping with that familiar, rehearsed pity. "Don't be so dramatic. It's probably just the stress of your father's side coming out. You don't need my history. My history is clean. We don't have glitches like that." That was the moment something snapped. I realized she wasn't just being mean. She was guarding something. The doctor's request wasn't just a formality, it was a necessity. My heart would skip beats, a fluttering sensation in my chest that felt like a trapped bird. I needed answers, but Evelyn had slammed the door. A week after she dismissed my concerns in the sunroom, I tried one more time. I found her in the kitchen, meticulously labeling wine bottles for an upcoming social club meeting. I brought a notepad and a pen. I told her the clinic needed to know about any history of arrhythmias or valve issues on her side of the family. "I already told you, Chloe," she said, her voice sharpening. She didn't stop writing. "My family is a closed book of health and vitality. If you're having heart problems, look at your father's medical records, if he even had any. Men like him usually just ignore their rot until it kills them." "This isn't about him right now," I said, my voice trembling. "The doctor specifically asked for maternal history. Please, Mom, it's just a list of names and conditions." She finally set the marker down and looked at me. Her expression wasn't one of concern, it was pure, cold annoyance. "I am not having my medical history, my clean history, linked to your episodes in a public clinic database. You've always been desperate for attention, but faking a heart condition to dig into my private family business is a new low even for you." I left the kitchen without a word. 2 days later, I found out she had called my Uncle Robert and 2 of her cousins. She told them I was spiraling and trying to blame my poor lifestyle choices on the family's genetic legacy. When I saw Robert at the grocery store, he didn't even say hello. He just shook his head and murmured, "Leave your mother alone, Chloe. She's dealt with enough of your father's drama." The damage wasn't just social. Because I couldn't provide a family history, the clinic couldn't authorize the specific, expensive genetic screening my insurance required to narrow down the cause of the palpitations. My diagnosis was stalled. I was stuck in a loop of unspecified cardiac events, which meant I couldn't get the proper medication. I spent my nights lying awake, feeling my heart thump irregularly, wondering if I was going to die because my mother was too proud of her bloodline to help me. I felt like a ghost in the family. Mia, meanwhile, was being celebrated. Evelyn had decided that Mia's slight fatigue from tennis was the noble exhaustion of a thoroughbred and took her to a private specialist, paying out of pocket just to make sure her star was okay. The turning point came on a Tuesday. I was sitting in the clinic waiting room, feeling particularly weak. A nurse named Sarah, who had seen me 3 times that month, sat down next to me. "Still no family history?" she asked gently. "My mother won't give it to me," I whispered. "She says her side is perfect." Sarah looked at my chart, then back at me. "Chloe, you don't actually need her permission to find out your own genetic makeup. We offer a direct clinical-grade DNA sequencing and ancestry report. It's more comprehensive than the commercial ones. It'll tell us about the markers we're looking for, regardless of what she says." "How much?" I asked. "It's $300, she said. "Insurance won't cover it without the family history, but it will give you the data you need to get treated." $300 was my entire savings from my part-time job at the library. It was the money I was saving for a new set of tires. But as I felt my heart skip another beat, I realized I couldn't afford to wait. I wasn't just paying for a test, I was paying for the truth that Evelyn was holding hostage. I swiped my card. I spit into the tube. "It takes about 6 weeks for the full breakdown," Sarah said. "We'll look for the cardiac markers, but since we're doing the full panel, you'll get everything. Ancestry, maternal and paternal haplogroups, the works." I walked out of the clinic feeling lighter and heavier all at once. I didn't tell Evelyn. I didn't tell Mia. For the first time in my life, I was doing something that didn't involve begging for her approval. In the weeks that followed, Evelyn's campaign against me intensified. She started telling people that I was genetically predisposed to instability, using my frequent clinic visits as proof that I was damaged goods. At a Sunday brunch with her friends, I walked in to find her mid-sentence. "Just a shame," she was saying, sipping her mimosa. "I did my best to raise her, but you can't outrun the genes. She's just like him. Weak heart, weak character. It's a tragedy, really, especially when you see how well Mia turned out." The guests looked at me with a mixture of pity and distaste. I was the cautionary tale. I was the living proof that Evelyn was a saint for putting up with me. I went to my room and closed the door. I didn't cry, I just checked my email. I knew the window for the results was closing. I was tired of being the stray with the bad blood. I wanted to know what I was actually made of. That night I had a dream that I was made of glass and Evelyn was throwing stones at me, laughing about how easily I shattered. I woke up sweating, my chest tight. I reached for my phone, no new emails. I looked at the calendar. Christmas was approaching. Evelyn was already planning the big dinner, talking about the heritage ham she had ordered and how the whole family tree would be gathered around the table. I realized then that she didn't view us as people. We were just branches on a tree she thought she owned. She spent every day pruning me so that Mia could look taller. But trees have roots, and roots are hidden underground where no one can see them until you start digging. I had spent $300 on a shovel, and I was just waiting for the dirt to move. The weeks leading up to December were a slow exercise in being erased. My mother's narrative about my defective nature had moved beyond our house and into the wider circle of our extended family. It wasn't just that I was the black sheep. I was being framed as a biological liability. At a pre-Christmas cocktail party hosted by my Aunt Sarah, I was standing by the buffet when I overheard my mother talking to a group of her cousins. She was holding a glass of expensive champagne, looking radiant in a deep forest green dress that she'd told me I didn't have the complexion to pull off. "It's just so hard," she said, her voice dropping into that performative, hushed tone she used when she wanted to sound like a martyr. "Chloe has these episodes, these little heart flutters, and the doctors say it's just her system struggling. It's the father's line, of course. I try to keep her spirits up, but how do you fight what's written in the code? I just thank God every day that Mia took after my side. Could you imagine if they both had those?" Tendencies. One of the cousins, a woman named Linda who usually liked me, looked over at me with a face full of genuine pity. It must be a burden for you, Evelyn. You've always been so healthy, to have a daughter who's so fragile. It is, my mother sighed. But that's what a mother does. We carry the weight of the choices we made in our youth. She made my existence sound like a youthful indiscretion she was still paying for. I looked down at my plate of crackers and cheese. I felt the heat rising in my neck. I wasn't fragile. I was 27 years old. I worked 40 hours a week, and I was the only person in that house who knew how to fix a leaking pipe or balance a checkbook. But in that room, under the glow of the Christmas lights, I was just a genetic error. The damage started to bleed into my life outside the family, too. My boyfriend at the time, Mark, came from a very traditional, family-oriented background. His parents had invited us over for dinner, and I found out later that my mother had called his mother to warn her. She told my mom that you have chronic health issues that might be hereditary, Mark told me one night, looking conflicted. She said she just wanted us to be informed before we got too serious about a future. My mom is obsessed with grandkids, Chloe. She's been acting weird ever since. My mother was poisoning the well of my future to keep herself at the top of the mountain. She was using my fear for my own health as a weapon to make sure I stayed small, stayed dependent, and stayed grateful for her tolerance. While I was being pushed to the margins, Mia was being elevated to a pedestal that seemed to grow higher every day. For the upcoming Christmas dinner, my mother had commissioned a hand-painted family tree on parchment to display in the foyer. She spent hours with Mia, tracing the lines of pure ancestors, pointing out the doctors and the judges and the strong-hearted women. My name was there, but it was tucked away at the bottom, a tiny branch that looked like it was struggling to stay attached to the trunk. "We have to honor the legacy, Mia," I heard her say one afternoon. "You are the carrier of this flame, never forget that." I stayed in the kitchen, scrubbing the roasting pan for the Christmas ham. I felt like I was disappearing. Every time I looked in the mirror, I tried to see the rot she talked about. I looked for the shifty eyes of my father or the weak chin she claimed I had. I couldn't see them. I just saw a woman who was tired of being told she didn't belong to the people who raised her. Then, 6 weeks to the day after my clinic visit, the portal pings. I was at the library shelving books in the biography section. My phone vibrated in my pocket. I pulled it out and saw the notification. "Your clinical results are ready." My hands shook so hard I almost dropped a hardback copy of a Roosevelt biography. I walked to the staff break room, my heart doing that familiar, frantic dance in my ribs. I logged into the secure portal. The first page was the medical data. I scanned it quickly. No markers for the major hereditary heart conditions we were worried about. My heart was fine. The palpitations were likely a result of extreme, prolonged stress. I felt a momentary surge of relief, but then I scrolled down to the ancestry and kinship report. I expected to see a 50% match with my mother. I expected to see a long list of relatives from her side of the family, the judges, and the strong-hearted women she bragged about. Instead, I saw a 0% maternal match. I blinked. I refreshed the page. I thought there must be a mistake in the software. I looked at the kinship section again. It listed a full sibling match, Mia. We shared the same father and the same biological mother, but that biological mother was not Evelyn. I sat there in the dim light of the break room, the hum of the vending machine the only sound in the world. The thoroughbred and the stray were made of the exact same stuff. Mia wasn't the gold standard, and I wasn't the leftover parts. We were both something else entirely. Everything Evelyn had built, the hierarchy, the pure blood narrative, the gold locket, the family tree in the foyer, was a lie. She wasn't just a mother who favored one child. She was a woman who had stolen a legacy and used it to crush one girl while inflating another. I looked at the names on the screen. The report had flagged a close relative match on my father's side, Helen, my Aunt Helen. My father's sister, who Evelyn had banned from the house 15 years ago, claiming she was toxic and unstable. I realized then that Evelyn hadn't just been protecting her ego. She had been protecting a crime. I printed the report. I watched the paper slide out of the library printer, the black ink still warm to the touch. I folded it carefully and put it in my backpack. That night at dinner, Evelyn complained that the potatoes I'd mashed were a bit lumpy, suggesting it was my lack of attention to detail coming through again. I didn't apologize. I didn't even look at her. I just ate my dinner and thought about the parchment family tree in the foyer. The roots were finally coming up. The realization that my entire biological identity was a fabrication didn't hit me all at once. It leaked into my brain like cold water. Every genetic insult Evelyn had ever hurled at me, every pedigree praise she'd heaped on Mia, it was all part of a script she had written to keep us in our places. I spent that night staring at the printed report. The numbers were absolute. $0, $0 maternal match to Evelyn. A $99, $9 sibling match to Mia. We weren't just sisters, we were full sisters. The thoroughbred and the stray were the exact same breed. The next morning, the social campaign against me reached a new peak. Evelyn had sent out the annual family Christmas newsletter, a glossy, 4-page fold-out she mailed to over 50 relatives and family friends. I found a stack of them on the mail sorter in the hallway. The front page featured a professional photo of Evelyn and Mia in matching cream sweaters, looking like a pair of high-society twins. I wasn't in the photo. I was mentioned on page 3, in a small paragraph tucked under a heading about family challenges. While we celebrate Mia's continued excellence in her studies and her budding tennis career, we also ask for your thoughts for Chloe. She continues to struggle with the more difficult aspects of her late father's temperament. We are doing our best to support her through her recent health scares, which we fear are simply the manifestation of a troubled lineage. We remain hopeful that with enough discipline, she can overcome what's written in her blood. It was a public execution of my character. She was telling everyone we knew that I was biologically destined to fail. She was framing my heart palpitations, which I now knew were caused by the very stress she created, as proof that I was rotting from the inside out. An hour later, I got a text from Mia. "Hey, I saw the newsletter. Mom's right, you know. You've been really intense lately. Just try to behave this Christmas. Uncle Robert and the cousins are coming, and Mom worked really hard on the menu. Don't ruin it with one of your episodes." I looked at the phone. Mia didn't even know she was a victim, too. She had been brainwashed into believing she was a superior being, a pure extension of a woman who didn't even share her DNA. Evelyn had turned my own sister into my warden. I didn't reply. I went to the foyer and looked at that hand-painted family tree. I saw the names of Evelyn's ancestors, the judges, the socialites, the doctors. They weren't my ancestors. They weren't Mia's either. We were being grafted onto a dead tree by a woman who wanted to play God. The dread in my stomach grew. If Evelyn wasn't our mother, then who was? And how had she managed to keep this a secret for 25 years? My father had been a quiet man, but surely he wouldn't have gone along with this level of psychological warfare. I went to the library and used a private terminal to look up the local archives. I searched for my father's name and the word marriage. I found a record from 1996. He had married a woman named Alina, not Evelyn. Alina, I kept digging. I found an obituary from 1999. Alina had died in a car accident when I was 3 and Mia was barely 1. 2 months later, my father had married Evelyn. Evelyn hadn't just stepped in as a stepmother. She had She had legally adopted us, buried the truth, and then spent 2 decades telling us that one of us inherited her glory and the other inherited our father's shame. She had created a biological hierarchy out of thin air just so she could have a favorite and a foil. I took the clinic report and placed it in the bottom of my backpack, right next to the printed obituary of a woman named Alina who had my eyes and my smile. I felt a strange, cold clarity. The Christmas dinner was 2 weeks away. 12 guests were coming to toast to a lineage that didn't exist. Evelyn was planning to carve the ham and hold court as the matriarch of a bloodline she had stolen. I realized I wasn't just a scapegoat anymore. I was a witness. That night, Evelyn called me into the kitchen to help her polish the silver. She handed me the cloth and the polish with a look of practiced weariness. "Try to get the tarnishing off the handles, Chloe," she said. "I know it's hard for you to focus on the fine details, but try for once. We want everything to look perfect for the guests. First impressions are everything, though I suppose you wouldn't understand that." I took the silver fork. I looked at her, really looked at her. I saw the expensive jewelry, the perfectly styled hair, and the smug curve of her lips. She thought she was invincible because she held the narrative. "I understand more than you think," I said quietly. She laughed, a short, brittle sound. "I doubt that. Now get to work. The silver doesn't clean itself, and God knows you're the only one here with the sturdy hands for it." I started polishing. I didn't stop until the silver shone like a mirror. I wanted her to see herself clearly when the time came. I wanted her to see every line of the lie she had told. The lab results were a cold, hard fact, but I needed to understand the how before I faced the who. I called the clinic and asked to speak with Dr. Aris, the geneticist who had overseen the full panel. I told him there was a significant discrepancy between my known family history and the results. "Dr. Aris," I said, my voice steady despite the hammering in my ribs. "The report says $0, 0% maternal match. Is there any chance of a sample contamination?" "We ran the markers twice, Chloe," he said, his tone professional but not unkind. "In a maternal exclusion case this absolute, there is no room for error. The woman you call your mother is not your biological parent. Furthermore, the sibling test confirms you and Mia are full biological sisters. You share the same mother and father. That mother just isn't the woman on your insurance forms." Hearing it from a man of science made the floor feel solid again. I wasn't crazy. I wasn't defective. I was just the target of a 25-year gaslighting campaign. But I needed the history. I needed the parts of the story that weren't written in DNA. I thought of the one person Evelyn had spent 15 years turning into a villain. Aunt Helen. My father's sister lived 2 towns over in a small, cramped apartment filled with stacks of old newspapers and the smell of jasmine tea. When I knocked on her door, she looked at me through the chain link with eyes that were identical to mine. "Chloe," she whispered. "Evelyn let you out of the house." "She doesn't know I'm here," I said. "Helen let me in." We sat at a small kitchen table and I laid the clinic report between us. I didn't have to explain much. One look at the $0, 0% maternal exclusion and Helen started to cry. It wasn't a loud sob, it was the sound of a long-held breath finally being released. "I tried to tell you girls," Helen said, wiping her eyes with a tattered sleeve. "After your mother, Alina, died in that crash, your father was destroyed. He was a shell. Evelyn was a neighbor, a friend who stepped in to help with the babies. She married him within months. She made him sign these non-disclosure agreements as part of the adoption, saying it was for the girl's stability. She didn't want you to ever know you weren't hers. But why the hierarchy?" I asked. "Why make Mia the golden child and me the stray?" Helen reached across the table and took my hand. Her skin was rough, but her grip was firm. Because you look like Alina, Chloe. You have her face, her stubbornness, her quiet way of observing things. Mia was a baby when Alina died. She was a blank slate Evelyn could mold into a mini version of herself. But every time Evelyn looked at you, she saw the woman who came before her. She saw the real mother. She couldn't get rid of you, so she decided to discredit you. She turned your resemblance to your mother into bad genes from your father. The clarity was like a physical weight lifting off my chest. I wasn't the problem. I was just a reminder of a truth Evelyn wanted to bury. She had spent 2 decades punishing me for having my mother's eyes. She told Mia she's a thoroughbred of her own line, I said. It's a delusion, Helen replied. Evelyn was obsessed with status. She hated that she was the second wife, the replacement. So she rewrote history. She told the whole family she was the biological mother, and she threatened to sue your father into the ground if he ever corrected her. After he died, there was no one left to stop her, except me, so she told everyone I was a liar and a drunk and banned me from the house. Helen went to a closet and pulled out a dusty shoebox. Inside were photos Evelyn thought she had burned. There was Alina, laughing, holding a toddler version of me. We were at a park. The sun was hitting Alina's hair, and she looked so full of life it hurt to breathe. Keep these, Helen said, shoving the photos into my hands. And Chloe, if you're going to do something, do it where everyone can see. That's the only way to break a woman like Evelyn. She lives for the audience. I left Helen's apartment with a backpack full of evidence. I had the DNA report. I had the photos of my real mother. I had the legal confirmation of the adoption dates from the county records Helen helped me find. The support didn't make me feel like a winner yet. It just made me feel armed. I drove home and parked in the driveway of the big, silent house that felt more like a museum than a home. Evelyn was in the window, watching me. I could see her silhouette against the expensive curtains. She probably thought I was coming home from another episode at the clinic. She probably had a fresh insult ready about how my father's side couldn't handle the winter chill. I patted the backpack on the passenger seat. Not skipping Christmas, Mom, I whispered to the empty car. I wouldn't miss it for the world. I walked inside. The house smelled like pine and expensive wax. The heritage ham was sitting in the fridge. The guest list was finalized. 12 people were coming to celebrate a lie, and for the first time in my life, I wasn't afraid of the seating chart. I was the one who knew where everyone truly belonged. The leverage wasn't just a piece of paper anymore. It was a physical weight in my backpack that changed how I walked through the house. For the first time in 27 years, I didn't flinch when I heard Evelyn's heels clicking on the hardwood. I didn't look down at my shoes when she told me I looked gray or unmeticulous. I spent the week before Christmas securing my position. I knew how Evelyn operated. If I showed her the report in private, she would burn it, call the police, and tell the entire family I had forged a medical document in a fit of inherited insanity. To stop a woman who lives for the audience, you have to use the audience as your shield. I went to the library and made 3 high-quality color copies of the DNA report. I also scanned the photos Aunt Helen had given me, the ones of Alina holding me as a toddler. I put the originals in a safety deposit box at the bank. Then I set up an auto-draft email. If I didn't log in and cancel it by noon on December 26th, a digital copy of the DNA results and the adoption records would be sent to every person in Evelyn's email contact list. "What are you doing in here, Chloe?" Evelyn was standing in my doorway. She didn't knock. She never knocked. She looked at my backpack, her eyes narrowing with that sharp, predatory instinct she used to sniff out any sign of rebellion. "Just organizing my things for the new year," I said. I kept my voice flat. I didn't give her the satisfaction of a tremor. "Well, try to organize your face for tomorrow," she snapped. I've invited the Millers and your Uncle Robert. I won't have you moping around like a dark cloud. It's bad enough we have to explain your condition to the neighbors. At least try to look like you belong in a civilized home." "I'll do my best to look exactly like I belong, Mom," I said. She lingered for a second, sensing something different in my tone. She was used to me apologizing or shrinking. My stillness bothered her. "Good," she said, finally turning away. "And make sure the silver is laid out by 8. Don't let your father's side forget the schedule." I waited until I heard her bedroom door click shut. Then I pulled out the stamped, official clinic report. It was beautiful in its clinical coldness. Maternal exclusion. Those 2 words were the end of her reign. They proved that the pure blood she bragged about didn't run through Mia's veins any more than it did mine. It proved that her entire identity as the biological savior of 2 broken girls was a fiction she'd maintained to satisfy her own narcissism. I called Aunt Helen that night. "I'm doing it tomorrow," I whispered into the phone. "Are you sure, Chloe?" Helen asked. "There's no going back once that room sees it. She'll hate you forever." "She already hates me, Helen," I said. "She just hates me for a lie. I'd rather she hate me for the truth." "I'll have my phone on," Helen promised. "If Mia needs to hear it from someone else, tell her to call me. I've waited 20 years to tell that girl she has her mother's heart." I hung up and sat in the dark. The house was decorated to the hilt. Every corner had a ribbon, a candle, or a sprig of holly. It was a stage set for the perfect family. Evelyn had spent weeks choreographing this performance, making sure every guest would leave thinking she was the pinnacle of maternal grace. She had no idea the script had been rewritten. I looked at the backpack sitting on my desk. Inside, the report was tucked into a manila folder. It was my ticket out of the basement of this family. It was the end of the thief jeans jokes and the bad blood whispers. Tomorrow, the guests would arrive. Tomorrow, the ham would be carved. Tomorrow, Evelyn would look at me and see a target for her cheap laughs, just like she always did. But for the first time in my life, I wasn't the one who was going to be caught off guard. I fell asleep feeling my heart beat, steady, rhythmic, and perfectly healthy. It wasn't skipping anymore. It was counting down. The morning of Christmas Day was a study in choreographed perfection. Evelyn was in her element, moving through the kitchen in a silk robe, directing the caterers and me with the sharp efficiency of a drill sergeant. The house smelled of expensive pine, roasting cloves, and wood smoke. To any outsider looking through the frosted windows, we were the picture of a high society holiday. "Chloe, the Waterford glasses are still cloudy," she said, not looking at me as she adjusted the sprigs of rosemary on the appetizer trays. "I know your father's people struggled with basic hygiene, but try to remember we have guests with standards coming in 3 hours. Don't let your natural tendencies ruin the table." I didn't argue. I didn't even sigh. I picked up the lint-free cloth and polished the lead crystal until it gleamed like ice. I felt a strange, detached calm. Every insult she threw was just another brick in the wall she was about to hit. I was watching a ghost haunt her own house, and she didn't even know she was dead yet. I went to my room to get changed. I chose a simple navy dress, nothing flashy, nothing that would draw the eye until I wanted it to. I checked my backpack one last time. The manila folder was there, the edges crisp. I felt the weight of the photos Aunt Helen had given me, tucked into the back pocket. I was carrying my mother into her house, and for the first time, I wasn't afraid of the haunting. By 5 o'clock, the 12 guests had arrived. Uncle Robert was there, already smelling of bourbon and expensive cigars. The Millers, neighbors who lived in a house even bigger than ours, were nodding along as Evelyn held court in the foyer. She stood right in front of the hand-painted family tree, her hand resting lightly on Mia's shoulder. "It's so important to know where you come from," Evelyn was telling Mrs. Miller. Mia has always been such a clear reflection of my grandmother's side. The poise, the intellect, it's all in the blood. We're so blessed to have such a sturdy foundation. She didn't mention me. I was busy taking coats and offering water. I was the servant in my own life, the stray who was allowed to linger near the warmth as long as I stayed in the shadows. I saw Mia catch my eye. She looked uncomfortable, her gold locket catching the light. She looked like she wanted to say something, but Evelyn's grip on her shoulder was firm. "Dinner is served," Evelyn finally announced, her voice ringing with triumphant authority. We moved into the dining room. The table was a masterpiece of silver and candlelight. I took my assigned seat at the far end near the kitchen door. My backpack was tucked securely under my chair, the strap looped around my ankle. I felt the vibration of a text in my pocket. It was Aunt Helen. "I'm here. Whenever you're ready." The meal began with a flurry of polite conversation and the clinking of heavy cutlery. Evelyn was at the head of the table, presiding over the 12 guests like a queen. She told stories of her illustrious ancestors, weaving a tapestry of biological superiority that made everyone else in the room feel slightly inferior. "The women in my line have always been the anchors," she said, raising her wine glass. "We don't break. We don't have those shifty impulses that plague lesser families. Isn't that right, Robert?" Uncle Robert chuckled, leaning back in his chair. "A regular dynasty, Evelyn, best blood in the county." I felt the bile rising in my throat. I looked at Mia, who was picking at her salad, her face pale in the candlelight. She had lived her whole life believing she was a thoroughbred, a superior being because of the woman sitting at the head of the table. She didn't know she was being used as a prop in a madwoman's play. The main course arrived, the heritage ham, glazed and glistening. Evelyn stood up, the carving knife in her hand. This was her moment of peak performance. She looked around the room, her eyes landing on me with a flicker of practiced disdain. I knew what was coming. I had heard variations of this joke for 20 years, but tonight it was going to be the last one. "Before we carve," she said, her voice dropping into that mock-playful tone that always preceded a strike, "I should tell everyone to keep a close eye on their jewelry. We have Chloe with us tonight, and as we all know, she has those thief genes from her father's side. We wouldn't want any family heirlooms disappearing into the night, would we?" A few of the guests chuckled awkwardly. Uncle Robert smirked into his wine glass, the liquid sloshing against the rim. The silence that followed was heavy, expectant. They were waiting for me to blush, to look at my plate, to shrink into the floorboards like I always did. Instead, I reached under my chair. My hand closed around the manila folder. My heart was steady. The bad blood was boiling, but not with shame. It was boiling with the truth. "Actually, Mom," I said, my voice cutting through the room like a blade, "I think it's time we talked about what's actually in our genes." Evelyn froze, the carving knife poised over the ham. The smile didn't leave her face, but her eyes turned into chips of blue ice. "Not now, Chloe, don't be tiresome. Your episodes are for the clinic, not the Christmas table." "It's not an episode," I said, standing up. "It's a report." I walked toward her, the folder in my hand. I felt every eye in the room follow me, the Millers, Uncle Robert, the cousins. The air in the room felt thin, like a storm was about to break. I stopped right next to her. I could smell her expensive perfume, the scent of a woman who thought she had scrubbed every trace of the truth away. "You've spent 27 years telling me I'm a stray," I said quietly. "You've spent 27 years telling Mia she's your masterpiece, but science is a funny thing, Evelyn. It doesn't care about your stories." I opened the folder. The room was so quiet I could hear the fire crackling in the hearth. I pulled out the stamped official clinic report. I didn't hand it to her. I didn't wait for her to take it. I dropped it dead center on her dinner plate, right on top of her untouched portion of heritage ham. "Happy Christmas, Mom," I said. "Let's see what the bloodline actually looks like." The report landed with a wet thud against the glaze of the ham. A small smear of honey mustard stained the bottom of the page, right next to the clinic's official blue seal. For a second, the only sound was the sharp, metallic scrape of Uncle Robert's fork hitting his plate. He stopped smirking. He leaned forward, squinting through his reading glasses at the bold headers on the paper. The Millers, usually so composed, exchanged a look of pure, bewildered discomfort. Evelyn didn't move. She stared down at her plate as if a venomous snake had just coiled itself around her silverware. Her hand, still gripping the carving knife, began to tremble, just a microscopic vibration, but enough to make the blade catch the light. "Chloe," she said, her voice a low, dangerous hiss. "Take this filth off the table. Now, you are having an episode. Robert, call the doctor." She's completely lost her grip. "Read the second page, Evelyn," I said. My voice was eerily calm, the kind of calm that comes when you've already jumped off the cliff and realized you have wings. "Read the part where it says maternal exclusion. It's a scientific term. It means there is 0% chance that you are my mother, or Mia's." The word Mia acted like a physical blow. My sister, who had been sitting frozen in her chair, suddenly lunged forward. She grabbed the report from Evelyn's plate, her fingers shaking so hard she nearly ripped the paper. She scanned the lines, her eyes darting back and forth. "What is this?" Mia whispered. "Chloe, what is this? It says we're full sisters, but it says the maternal match is..." She stopped. She looked at Evelyn, then back at the paper. "Mom, why does it say there's no match?" "It's a mistake." Evelyn suddenly shrieked, slamming her fist onto the table. A wine glass toppled over, sending a dark red stain spreading across the white linen like a gunshot wound. "These clinics are scams. They mix up samples. They want to extort people like us. Chloe, how dare you bring this garbage into my home? How dare you try to poison your sister's mind?" "It's not a scam, Evelyn," I said. I reached into my folder and pulled out the second piece of evidence, the certified copy of the 1999 adoption decree and the death certificate of Alina Rossi. "This is the legal record of your marriage to my father. You married him 2 months after my biological mother died. You adopted us. You didn't give birth to us. You aren't pure blood anything in this family. You're the woman who moved in and decided to play dress-up with 2 orphans." The room went cold. Mrs. Miller gasped, her hand flying to her throat. Uncle Robert stood up, his chair screeching against the hardwood. He looked at the adoption decree, then at Evelyn. "Evelyn." Robert asked, his voice thick with confusion. "You told us. You told everyone you went into labor with Mia during the blizzard of '98. You told us stories about the hospital. You said Chloe was the one who took after the father because she was the difficult birth." "I did what I had to do." Evelyn turned on him, her face contorting into something unrecognizable. The mask of the high society martyr was disintegrating, revealing a raw, jagged desperation. "I gave them a life. I gave them a name. I protected them from the truth of that. That woman, I built this family, me." "You didn't build a family," I said, walking around the table toward Mia. "You built a cage. You told me I was genetically flawed so you could feel superior. You told Mia she was your masterpiece so you could own her. You lied to every person in this room for 25 years just so you could be the center of a story that wasn't yours." Mia looked up at me. A single tear tracked through her makeup, leaving a dark line on her pale cheek. She looked down at the gold locket around her neck, the bloodline heirloom. With a sudden, violent jerk, she snapped the chain. The gold clattered onto the table, landing in the spilled wine. "You're not my mother," Mia asked, her voice small and broken. "All those things you said, about our traits, about our heritage, it was all a lie. I am the only mother you have ever known," Evelyn screamed. She lunged toward Mia, reaching for her arm, but Mia recoiled as if she'd been burned. She stood up and backed away, stumbling into the sideboard. "Don't touch me," Mia said. The silence that followed was different now. It was the silence of a jury. The 12 guests were no longer dinner companions, they were witnesses to a collapse. Mrs. Miller stood up quietly, grabbing her purse. She didn't look at Evelyn. She looked at me with a profound, horrified realization of what I had been enduring in this house. "I think we should go," Mr. Miller said, his voice tight. "No," Evelyn pleaded, her hands outstretched. "Wait, you don't understand. Chloe is unstable. She's manipulated these documents. Robert, tell them she's always been a liar." Uncle Robert didn't say a word. He picked up the DNA report, read the maternal exclusion line one last time, and set it back down on the table. He looked at Evelyn with a mixture of pity and disgust. "The dates don't lie, Evelyn," Robert said. "You told me you were pregnant. I remember the baby shower. You lied to your own brother for 20 years. "I wanted to belong," Evelyn wailed, dropping into her chair. She looked small now, huddled at the head of the table, surrounded by the wreckage of her perfect dinner. "I wanted to have what she had. I wanted the girls to be mine." "But they weren't," I said. I pulled out the final photo, the one of Alina holding us. I placed it on the table in front of Mia. She was. Her name was Alina. She was our mother, and she loved us enough to leave us with a father who loved us too. "You're the one who erased him, Evelyn. You're the one who turned his memory into a weapon against me." Mia picked up the photo. She stared at the woman with my eyes and her smile. A sob broke out of her, a raw, guttural sound that filled the room. She didn't go to Evelyn. She walked around the table and grabbed my hand. Her grip was desperate, her knuckles white. "Chloe," she choked out. "I'm so sorry. I believed her. I thought I was better than you. I'm so sorry." "It wasn't your fault, Mia," I said. "She programmed you to believe it. She needed a golden child to prove her own worth." The guests were streaming out now, leaving their coats, leaving the food, leaving the house as if it were on fire. Evelyn sat alone at the head of the table, her face buried in her hands. The heritage ham sat cold and abandoned. The hand-painted family tree in the foyer was now just a piece of expensive trash. "You have zero biological ties to anyone in this room, Evelyn," I said, my voice echoing in the emptying house. "You aren't a matriarch, you aren't a saint, you're just a woman who stole a seat at a table that didn't belong to you." She didn't look up. She just kept shaking her head, whispering, my girls," over and over again. But we weren't her girls. We never had been. We were the evidence of her crime, and the evidence had finally found its voice. Mia looked at me, her eyes red and swollen. "I can't stay here, Chloe. I can't stay in this house for one more minute." "I know," I said. "My car is outside. We're going to Aunt Helen's. She's been waiting for us." We walked out of the dining room together. As we passed the foyer, I stopped. I looked at the family tree with its elegant calligraphy and its fake branches. I reached out and tore the parchment from the wall. It ripped with a satisfying, jagged sound. I dropped it on the floor and stepped over it. Behind us, in the dining room, Evelyn started to wail, a long, high-pitched sound of a woman who had finally lost her audience. It followed us out into the cold night air, but as I started the car, the sound of the engine drowned it out. I looked at Mia in the passenger seat. She was still holding the photo of Alina. She looked at me, and for the first time in my entire life, I didn't see a thoroughbred looking down at a stray. I saw my sister. "Where do we go now?" she asked. "We go find out who we actually are," I said. I put the car in reverse and backed out of the driveway, leaving the big house and its big lies behind. My heart didn't skip a single beat. It was steady. It was strong. And for the first time, it was mine. The silence at Aunt Helen's kitchen table was different than the silence at our mother's. It was heavy, but it didn't feel like it was hiding a trap. Mia sat wrapped in a wool blanket, staring at a Polaroid of our father and Alina on their wedding day. She hadn't spoken since we crossed the city limits. "I spent 25 years thinking I was a miracle," Mia whispered, her voice rasping. "She told me I was the only thing that went right in her life. I used that to feel better than you, Chloe. I used it to stay quiet when she was cruel to you." She needed you to believe that, I said. A lie only works if someone is rewarded for keeping it. The fallout was immediate and absolute. Within 48 hours, the heritage newsletter Evelyn had sent out became her social obituary. Uncle Robert had called every relative on the list. The Millers had told the neighborhood. The woman who lived for the pedestal found herself standing in a crater. She tried calling us, leaving frantic, weeping voicemails about maternal bonds and ingratitude, but we blocked her number by the second day. She stayed in that big house alone. Without an audience to perform for, she seemed to wither. A few months later, Helen told us Evelyn had put the house on the market and moved 2 states away to a small condo where nobody knew her name or her fabricated lineage. She sent one final letter, not apologizing, but blaming me for destroying the only family I ever had. I didn't reply. You can't destroy something that was built on a foundation of sand. Mia and I spent that first year learning how to be sisters without a hierarchy. It wasn't easy. We had to unlearn the roles of winner and loser. But when we went to visit Alina's grave for the first time, standing there under a gray spring sky, I felt a connection that no amount of gaslighting could touch. We looked at the dates on the headstone, 1999, and realized we had been reclaimed. I still have the clinic report. It's tucked away in a file cabinet, a reminder that the truth doesn't need to be loud to be powerful. My heart palpitations stopped that night in the dining room and never came back. It turns out my bad genes were just a body reacting to a lifetime of being told it didn't belong. I look at a photo of Mia and me now, not a professional studio portrait, just a blurry shot of us laughing over coffee last Tuesday. There are no gold lockets, no hand-painted trees. Just 2 women who finally share the same last name and the same history. Blood didn't make us a family, but the truth finally made us sisters. What would you have done if you saw your own uncle smirking while you were being humiliated? Have you ever had a family member invent a narrative or a medical excuse just to keep you in your place? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. I read every single one. If you want to hear another story about how a DNA test ruined a family's golden child dynamic, click the link on the screen now. Don't forget to like and subscribe if you're a fellow scapegoat survivor. It helps me know I'm not alone.